congregation with no geographical boundary, working toward creating a global spiritual community rooted in profound love, which cultivates wonder, imagination, and the courage to act. Adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for many bricks and mortar congregations. Early on in the pandemic, we were in a unique position to assist many congregations with the transition. We hosted special episodes of The View, provided advice and counseling to religious professionals, and trained congregations for live streaming worship, all while providing robust online programming for our members. From worship to covenant groups, from classes to pastoral care, and from our monthly magazine to our letter writing ministry, we have found ways to build connection and community even through the screen. We have been a model for ministry on the margins, providing services for isolated Unitarian Universalists, becoming a spiritual lifeline for our members in prison, and investing in innovative ministry. We know better than anyone how deep and meaningful connections can be formed even from a distance. Unitarian Universalists have faced many challenges in these times, and we continue to persevere and to fight for justice and equity for all people, especially during moments of crisis. We are proud to be a leader in this faith movement, and we invite you to get involved in our ministry. We strive to be a place where anyone from anywhere can find spiritual refuge anytime they need it. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are so excited to bring you an all-new episode of The View. The View is a weekly Unitarian Universalist talk show discussing important faith-based topics from an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural perspective. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, we have welcomed guests from every corner of the world. Our guests are writers, scholars, activists, and religious thought leaders who are shaping Unitarian Universalism and society for the 21st century and beyond. I hope today's show inspires you. Hope it builds your faith. Hope it gives you perspective to see the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message.
Greetings, viewers of The View, the Voices of Unitarian Universalism. It is so wonderful to be back here another Thursday with you. My name is Michael Tino. I am so pleased and privileged to be part of the lead ministry team, the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which brings you The View and has for 399 episodes. We are one episode away from our 400th episode of The View and wrapping up, I believe it's season 9 of this weekly talk show about liberation and Unitarian Universalism and all sorts of interesting things. I'm joining you from Peekskill, New York, where 35 miles north of New York City, where the air quality is hazardous to breathe, but not quite as hazardous as it is in central Pennsylvania today. Yesterday the air was orange, and thanks to the weather patterns that are blowing smoke down from forest fires in Quebec. My heart is with anyone who has to be outside breathing this air today, and with the planet, which is on fire, literally. And speaking of central Pennsylvania, where the smoke has gotten itself to, DC Fortune, how are you today?
Hi, everybody. I am doing relatively well. Yesterday was an absolute horror show in regards to air quality. It was just brown. It was horrible. And today, like, I had to go out and do a bunch of stuff yesterday. So today my lungs are like, yeah, fuck that. We're not doing that again. So I'm inside with my air conditioner on, even though it's not warm outside, just so that I can have something that's filtering the air. But other than that, I'm doing okay. I'm excited for Pride coming up, and it's June, so it's sort of crunch time for ministers. But I'm looking forward to today's program. I'm going to hand it over to, I'm going to guess, Kiana Dene. Kiana Dene, who is in Michigan, who is free from all of this smoke. Go ahead.
We're not free. Okay, when I say we're not free, so many other lines came after that. I was like, I'm not free. But we are also suffering a little bit of the air quality. We've definitely been getting warnings the last 2 days about the air quality. It is not as hazy or as sight prohibitive as I'm seeing around other parts of the country, but we are not. We border up against Canada. I mean, the bridge to Canada is right up the street. So we are definitely in that mixture. My name is Kiana Dene. I'm excited to be here. I thought it was a 400 show. I was so glad I didn't have 400 episode outfit. It was all ready. I'm so glad I left that in the closet with the other gear. Aisha's faces, if y'all can see them, are worth every penny. I'm saying things just to literally see Aisha's face. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is the unceded land and land that was worked. It's the land of the Potawatomi people who are still here. And it is land that I know was worked with Black and brown labor, probably some of it stolen. And so I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for this conversation. And I'm going to pass it to my friend Aisha, my face making friend, so that we can get into the jam of the jam.
Thank you, Kiana. Today I'm Aisha Hauser. I am on the unceded land of the Duwamish, also known as the part of the Coast Salish people, also known as Seattle, Washington. So Seattle almost every single year experiences what you all on the East Coast and Pennsylvania and Michigan are experiencing. The forest fires happen more frequently here. And in 2020, in the summer, the wildfires that were happening in California and Oregon, because of how the wind goes, Seattle, there was one day that had the worst air quality in the world. And we don't have any fires right here in Seattle, like anywhere near us. That was New York yesterday. Yeah, I just heard Michael say that was New York yesterday. So it's quite interesting how Mother Nature works. So I'm learning that as well. Yeah, I work in a lot of spaces, but in one of them, I had someone who says to me, Aisha, your face looks like you have a question. So and Zoom's been the worst because I can't, at least like in a room, nobody's really quite paying attention to what my face is doing, but I can't fix my face. It's hard. It's so hard, especially when I'm very excited about things or have a reaction or just existing. So that's me. Michael, I'm going to send it back to you. I'm very excited about today's show too, because I'm actually kind of Kiana Dene and our sort of guests too. Very exciting.
Host people, before we get to our great conversation with our 4 guests, 2 of whom are also hosts, we like to do a little UU roundup. I don't know what there is to round up other than GA is right around the corner. As General Assembly. Business has started. If you're into mini assemblies and things, one of our mini assemblies is Saturday. One of them happened already, and it's starting early. It's creeping out into the year that we were supposed to like have as protected time from the business of GA. But listen, General Assembly is on its way. Do we have other things in the UU roundup? Aisha, how?
Yes, I do. I want to point out for folks who are registered as delegates, and if you are a delegate for your congregation, you do not have to be registered for General Assembly. You can vote on matters for free. There is no cost. So I say this so you can be part of the association business. And even though the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt is running unopposed, there is going to be what's called a referendum to affirm her being UUA president. So I just cast my vote yesterday. So I want to encourage those who support and affirm and promote the Reverend Dr. Sophia to be UUA president to please vote anyway. So it is a vote in the affirmative. So at least for me, I voted in the affirmative. I was very much a Sophia fan. So I just wanted to lift that up for folks, along with everything else you could vote for.
It's a great change that we changed the bylaws so that if you're an offsite delegate, you can register for business only at no cost. It used to be actually in the UUA bylaws that you had to pay to attend GA. And we got rid of that. We got rid of that so that if you're a delegate and you're attending virtually, you can register for just the business at no cost. You can still do that. And again, the business is happening. The voting is happening. Voting opened June 1st. There is one contested election. And if you want my opinion on the contested election, I'm happy to give it. But otherwise, uh, look up the nominees for the nominating committee and watch the candidate forum that the Election Campaign and Practices Committee put on, and I think it will speak for itself. I believe it will speak for itself, and I'll just leave it there. If the UU roundup is all GA related, Kiana, Janae, you have something for us?
No, I mean, no, I don't have anything for the roundup. My ADD is about as active as, squirrels on a acorn farm right now. I forgot. I was like, I was something about food. And I was like, I was going to order pizza so that I eat today. And then something shiny happened. And then I came back and I was making that face so I could remember to eat. I mean, you caught me in a moment. I mean, you brought me on screen. You should have known what could have happened.
You like to pick on Aisha for not being able to hide her face, but only one.
Just so that you all know, just to give Michael credit, what I did that made him think I had something important to say was I went like this.
Which is totally.
He's gonna say something. I gotta toss it to Kiana today.
That was my body saying, if you don't remember to order pizza, we're gonna do that all day long.
We'll remind you at the end of the hour. Thank you. So today we are talking about the future of Unitarian Universalist faith development. And we have some really amazing guests, and I want to actually start this conversation because two of our guests are familiar to you. Because our guests today are 4 of the 5 panelists who are giving what's called the Sophia Fahs Lecture at GA. And let me read you the blurb for it. Religious educators are champions of community and adaptation, fighting the forces of injustice and using teamwork to tackle the big work of faithfully becoming a more rooted, more loving Unitarian Universalism. The 2023 Fahs Lecture brings together a panel of religious educators to explore the future of UU faith development. Often it is one person giving a lecture on something really important to religious education. And this year there are 5 people sharing that stage. And the 5 panelists are Aisha Hauser, member of the lead ministry team at the Church of the Larger Fellowship. Kiana Danae Perkins, a UU ministerial aspirant who has been part of the UU world for a while and whose focus is innovative and responsive faith education. You all, if you've watched The View before, you know them. You know that Kiana Danae is the reason why we call it The View. Emma Linda McLean, who Aisha will tell us a little bit more about, but who is not with us today. And our 2 most special guests, Ms. Catherine Childs, who is a religious educator and storyteller from Montreal. And they are the director of religious explorations at the Unitarian Church of Montreal and the incoming president of LREDA, the Liberal Religious Educators Association. Aisha, as you might know, is the outgoing. She will always be outgoing, but she's the outgoing president of LREDA. Also joining us today is Kirsten Hunter, who is currently serving South Church UU in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, as Director of Lifespan Ministries, serving in a co-leadership along with a settled minister. That's fantastic. She's also a member of the Loretta Board, and she holds the Leadership Development Portfolio with Loretta. So, Catherine and Kirsten, welcome to The View. Aisha and Kiana and Danae, we're happy that you're like the experts here today. I don't know, where do we start? Aisha, do you want to tell us a little bit about
Yes.
Emmelinda, who can't be
Yes, let me thank you for that, because Emmelinda McLean is in Southern California. She will actually be joining us virtually when we present the panel on Friday, June 20, I want to say 4th. I'm hoping that is the correct date, but it's the Friday of GA, where this will be one of the live streamed workshops. And Emmelinda will join us through Zoom or through the magic of screens, the way we do right now. So Emmelinda McLean was a UU religious educator working in a congregation, and she got trained to be an owl leader and decided at some point to transition, and she helped or founded More Than Sex Ed, which is Tanner will share the link in the show notes. More Than Sex Ed is a Southern California based sexuality education program that serves all settings, including schools, and they have a staff, they have educators. So she will talk about how the OWL program, the Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education Program, she has brought it even more fully into the school systems in Southern California. So that is Emmelinda. She has been a religious educator for many years, and now is living her faith out loud, even though it is a secular program. So I do need to say that they don't do the faith in action, or the Lord help me, how do I not know the book? Sexuality faith. That's not part of this program, but they do use the values of Our Whole Lives. So thank you for that. But yeah, I'm actually going to be the moderator. So my role will be to start off the lecture and then ask some questions. So I won't be one of the panelists. Go ahead.
The lecture is happening on June 23rd at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. Right? Is that right?
It's Friday, whatever that Friday is.
Okay. I get 2 thumbs up from Captain. So
23rd. Great. Yes.
So Aisha, do you want to moderate this conversation too? Because
so one of the things, as a Loretta board, 3 of the Loretta board members are presented here, and I just want to say I'm super excited that Catherine will be handing we don't even have batons, whatever we want to call it, the flaming chalice to Catherine, and Kirsten's been a joy to work with. So I'm very excited about that. When we talked about who, what we do is we brainstorm, who do we want for the Fahs Lecture, and we, came to, let's talk about what the future of faith formation is, the future being now, what folks are doing now, how we are a responsive, not a reactive group of folks, being religious educators, and I think one of the most, I think for UU land famous examples is the teach-in, that there was one reaction and then a responsiveness to education, people wanting more information, wanting, what do we do next? So the Fahs Lecture, then we decided who's in settings that can speak to. I'm going to actually ask the question. We're going to do a little teaser that's going to be asked at General Assembly, which is, and I'm going to ask you all as we'll kick this off, in what ways have you tackled the big work of faithfully becoming a more loving and rooted Unitarian Universalist? So in what ways have you tackled the big work of faithfully becoming a more rooted and loving Unitarian Universalist? So whoever wants to start. Go ahead. I'm actually not even going to moderate that much. I'm just gonna open it up to the.
Okay, we're gonna break the rules completely right here, because I'm not gonna answer the question.
Awesome.
I'm gonna start out with just a little bit more framing, because I forgot that we had this framing and now I want to say it.
Yes.
So 2023 is 45 years since the death of Sophia Lyon Fahs. And just a note for anybody who might still be calling her Sophia, we don't know where the rumor came from, but at the Fahs Collaborative 5-year anniversary, her offspring said, we don't know where that came from, it's just Sophia. So Sophia Lyon-Fahs was a Unitarian religious educator who paved the way for a lot of the way that we do religious education even now, specifically focusing on child-led religious education and the idea that children were not empty vessels that we were going to fill up with Unitarian Universalism and make them awesome people. They were already awesome people to start with, and that it was our privilege as religious educators to help them learn and to learn alongside them. And Sophia Lyon-Fahs is the person for whom Loretta chose to name our lecture series. And whenever we frame things within the context of her work, we end up in this place where religious education within Unitarian Universalism is framed as something that's for children. And one of the things that we really wanted to make certain that we were talking about during the Fahs Lecture this year is adult religious education across the lifespan. It is one of the biggest developing areas for our professional religious educators. Within their professional lives, many people are moving from a children and youth role to a lifespan role. And if we as a faith community can continue to think about the value of religious education for adults, I'm sure I'll get into lots of my thoughts on that later. But that was a big part of why we wanted to structure the panel discussion this way, why we wanted to specifically have Kirsten on the panel, somebody who has a lifespan role and a very unique lifespan role, and also Kiana Dene as somebody who is expanding what our idea of religious education looks like in Unitarian Universalism, and obviously, as Aisha talked about, Emelinda's work of what does religious education look like if we're not doing it in church as church. So super thrilled to share the virtual and then in 2 weeks actual stage with these folks, and super thrilled to be taking on leadership at this moment. I guess this is where I start to like try and answer the question. I am somebody who has throughout their lifetime been called to leadership, and it's really a pleasure to be stepping into this role and to be taking on the work of lifting up all of the people and all of the ideas, and to really feel like I can be part of moving things forward and be part of moving forward what religious education can look like in our denomination, especially now at a time when many of our religious education programs are feeling the effects of 3 years of pandemic. Many of our religious education colleagues are feeling the impacts, not only in terms of their programs and church attendance, but also the way that they are being treated as employees. So I'll leave it there maybe for a moment, and I don't know if Kirsten or Kiana Dene want to pick up on Aisha's initial question.
I think we'll probably both jump in just because we're both, what you said was so fiery. I think I want to thank Loretta for inviting me into the conversation. Although a lot of the work that I've done in UU spaces has been with folks who are, under 21, I'm a member of Loretta because of some of the work I used to do, but I am not a certified religious educator, which is, I think education looks like a lot of things, just like I think ministry looks like a lot of things. So to say that is to say, I'm excited to be at the table because I think just as much as we have to widen the conversation, let me back up. I'm sorry, because I haven't eaten. See what the problem is? That's why that pizza was on my mind. But I did order it, by the way. I did order food. So focus. What I think I want to say is I'm really glad to be at the table in that we are looking at religious education as a spectrum that everyone needs, and that we're not just talking about how do we handle kids, right? I think that conversation has become that, and I'm excited to move away from how do we deal with the children who are in our congregation, which is a good question and a valid question, but if that's the only place where we're offering faith education, we've missed a whole bunch of people who contiguously need education around this faith. So I'm excited to be a part of the conversation. I'm excited for the frame that you offered, Catherine. And I think to answer Aisha's question quickly is, when I saw how much care and love my kids needed around this faith, it made me want to have other kids have that same experience. And as I started working with more adults, I started realizing they also still needed faith education. And so I've been able to be responsive and adaptive to the community whom I'm working with, to make sure that education is woven in somehow, somewhere. Whether it's one sermon that you get me with, you're probably going to get some education. You're probably going to get some history and some knowledge, because we're always, as I think, a living tradition. We also need to be living in our education and our thriving and growing. And so I'm excited. But Kristen, I want to throw it over to you in the East Coast.
Thank you. Thanks all. I'm also really excited to be a part of this, and so grateful for my colleagues who are in this conversation with me. And I will say for myself, there's a couple things that are coming up for me as I'm listening to what's already been shared. One of them is not only are our adults still very much enriched by, and not only is our faith strengthened by lifespan religious education that all of us are continually learning and growing, but one of the things I think anybody who serves as a religious educator discovers, even if your portfolio is specifically for children and youth, is that you can't provide religious education to children and youth without being in relationship with the adults in the congregation, because you are one person. The amount of time you have with children and youth is maybe a couple hours a month, if that. The people who are in relationship with them in a regular way are their families, and then their wider network, their wider community. So no matter what your portfolio is, we are lifespan religious educators by the nature of the work we're doing, both in fostering volunteers who are working with our kids, helping develop parents' understanding of what it means to raise UU kids, UUs themselves. So all of that for me is coming alive. I grew up in a UU congregation, and my parents stopped going when I was 13. They just, what they thought of as what mattered with church was a particular period of time through what was then called AYS, but is OWL now. They really wanted me to have that. And I think a lot of the adults in our congregation who have children think that way. Like, here's what I want to make sure they have, and then it's up to them, and they kind of hands off, and we lose our kids. So I was a weirdo, and I kept going. I got hitched rides to church, but a lot of times, right, you need the investment, you need the engagement of parents in order for that continuity to happen. So that idea of lifespan is really expanding for me. And the only other thing I'll say now before we maybe I pass off to Aisha is also the there's some incongruity right now, I feel like, in our congregations in what we say our values are and how we operate. And so in my own congregation, some of the ways that I'm living into becoming more rooted and faithful has to do with governance, which maybe for some people doesn't seem like the first thing you think of when you think of our faith, but like how we do what we do matters. The relationships we have with one another matter. The ways that we recognize knowledge as we build it, and recognize relationship as we build it, and really focus on preserving that and making it as healthy as possible. Those things are incredibly impactful in our systems. So that for me is a piece of this conversation too. Go ahead, Aisha.
I appreciate that so much, Kirsten. So much is coming in for me, but I'll start with, I appreciate the framing, Kirsten, what you said, that really, no matter even if our job description is just children and youth, I'm saying that in air quotes, it really is lifespan, because if we're not engaging families, usually they end either at coming of age or after our whole lives, junior high age ends, and then we don't see the families again. And to your point about governance, there's a Zen phrase that I learned many years ago: how you do anything is how you do everything. And one of my experiences in UU congregations is what happens in worship is one thing, what happens in religious education is another, what happens in this affinity group is yet a third, and so on and so forth, rather than what does it look like to show up as a Unitarian Universalist rooted in love and community care all the time in everything we do, rather than this scarcity mentality of, well, what I've worked in several congregations, but one of them, worship was so scripted. And I'm not suggesting not to script worship, but it was kind of stifling. Like I rarely gave the story for all ages when I was a religious educator, and yet they wanted to grow the program. And I'm like, but don't you want the adults to see what I'm about? Like they're handing their kids off to me. I had one family, the father said to me, when I first came here, you tried to take my children away. And he was from Bolivia, where multi-generational worship was a thing, and grew up Catholic. And the framing was so stark, and I just started laughing. But I'm like, damn, that is so true. We're like, hey, you go there, we're going to take your kids and go over there. And where I was, RE was 4 buildings away. So it wasn't even like we were downstairs or upstairs. We were just on a whole other part of the campus. So what would it look like if, here's a radical idea. What would it look like if the ministerial formation process was rooted in religious education and faith formation leadership rather than worship? I mean, I think one of the things I say to folks is what I have found is religious educators who do this well and last a long time, especially in the same congregation, have to be collaborative, because that is the nature of our work. If we're simply putting our own selves on a pedestal and refusing to collaborate, we're not going to be able to recruit teachers. We're not going to be able to have training. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't going to happen if we are not good at being collaborative and community oriented. So I'm curious what others think about that.
I mean,
I'm over here gobsmacked. I think I just cut somebody off, though. Was that you, Michael?
well, I was gonna say part of what's missing is like this understanding of what it means to actually collaborate as equals with people and not right, like to actually like be a team and not some sort of hierarchical mess. Yeah. Like, should you and I have the same expertise? Well, that would just duplicate things. But like, if we bring our expertise together, like, how exciting is that? Right?
Like it boggles like.
So the thing that you said, Aisha, that caught my attention and that made me make the biggest Scooby-Doo noise was that I'm in seminary because I'm going through my own personal, intentional, spiritual transformation and understanding and grounding myself in this faith. And so if I'm not transmitting that, whether that be with anyone who walks in a building we call a Unitarian Universalist congregation or church, then what the hell am I doing? And if my education isn't centered around the thing that you said, I wish I could repeat it. If I'm not thinking about faith formation on every moment that it could happen, then what if all I'm doing is focusing on worship? And I don't understand that faith formation is happening at the potluck, at the coffee hour. It's happening with the children. It's happening with the adults. It's happening with the adult who's willing to drive their child 40 minutes to do OWL, but sits in the parking lot. If I can't understand the connectivity of that level of faith formation while I'm undergoing faith formation, right? Because that's part of what seminary and ministry should be, is an internal and external understanding of faith formation as it applies personally and communally. Then what the hell are we in school for? What the hell is a student loan for? And I hope that my generation is shifting the energy of this sense of hierarchy. And as Michael said, re-understanding what it means to be collaborative. It isn't, are you going to read a book this Sunday? It's, here is the Sunday service theme. How can we make this an integral experience that touches people, whether they need it in the reading, whether they need it in the music, whether they need it in the time for all ages, whether they need it in the hallway, where the space where we do child-based faith education, and whether it's the thing that we do afterwards where we talk about governance and we talk about Article 2. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what collaboration is. That's what the Venn diagram should look like when it's done. Friend Kirsten, I keep saying Kirsten, and I'm not sure I'm saying it right. Can you correct me? Because you deserve to be called by the right name.
Waiting for my face to appear. There I am. Kirsten. It sounds like Kier. Thanks for asking. And yes, and I would just add, the one piece I would add to what you're saying, Kiana, is I think it's really easy for us to say, oh, I'm collaborative. But collaboration, one, it requires honoring the talents of others, which I think Michael was getting at a little bit. But two, it requires relationship. And this is the part that I think we throw away so often in our congregations and in our wider network of our wider faith community, is we are building relationships with one another, and that is a critical piece of collaborating, because in order to collaborate, you have to let go of control, and in order to let go of control, you have to have trust. So there is like this constant cycle that is happening when you are developing a collaborative community that has to do with building relationship, building trust, building processes and like ways of being with one another that are repetitive, that are iterative, that are generative over time. And that is something that religious educators in part are good at, because that has been fostered in religious education community for decades. So religious educators collaborate with one another out of necessity, because religious educators are under-resourced almost all the time, because educators are overstretched almost all the time. And so we lean on each other, and a new religious educator comes in, and there is generally a culture of scooping them up. I don't want to speak for everyone that this is a universal experience, but there is many times what I hear often for religious educators is that there is a real welcoming and collaborative spirit to our professional network. And that is something we're learning with one another. And then we take that into our congregational spaces. So where are the other places that that's happening? How do we identify those as a faith movement? And how do we foster them and learn from them is the question that I have.
That's a word, Kirsten. So much. Go ahead, Michael. DC, sorry. I didn't realize who was talking.
I just had this weird sort of, I don't know if it's call it an epiphany, a realization, or whatever. And it could be because I can see two sides of this particular coin. And that is, toxic masculinity is the root of all of this fuckery. Because what I'm hearing is the religious education model, which has historically been the work of female type people, is collaborative work, because that is how women relate to one another. And the role of the minister has historically been male and has not been collaborative among ministers, but competitive. And it's interesting, because I started seminary identifying back then as a queer woman. And now here I am identifying as male, but I am still socialized to do the collaborative work, which is sort of like, this is just hitting me. Like, this is why the last 3 or 4 weeks has just been making me mad, because why wouldn't people collaborate? What the hell's wrong with you? And I'm like, oh, right, because boys weren't taught how to do that. And I just, oh man. And I mean, we see a new generation, and I'm not talking age, I'm talking vintage, a new vintage of trained clergy who are much more collaborative, who are much more willing to share, who are far less interested in whose steeple is taller than the other one, right? And we see that generationally. And part of that, of course, is because professional ministry has become majority female in the last decade or two. So all this to say, my hope is that, eat your Wheaties and eat your veggies, and we'll just wait until the tide turns on this one. You know, because oh man, oh, it's just so frustrating. It's just like, why wouldn't you? This is like I said last week, right? Why wouldn't you collaborate with your religious educator? You've got a goddamn magician on your staff. Like, don't be an idiot. Work with that person, right? Like, I don't know. Somebody rescue me. I'm just mad.
Catherine, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, particularly come in as the Laredo president, as a voice around all of this, where we are, which is a unique place, and the places we want to go, which is some of the conversation we get to have at GA on Friday of GA at 12:30 ET. That, just to put it out there.
Just do the promo. Do the promo Canada Day. Excellent.
Yes.
So one of the things that I have been thinking about hearing all of you speak is sort of about what's the difference between authentic relationship and the old boys club.
Yeah.
And it's one of the big questions that has sort of come up intermittently for me as I've gone through my UU life and been in situations where I'm going, is what is happening right now because of deeply cultivated authentic relationship? Or is it just because you knew somebody and now that person is doing the thing? And I think the size of our denomination, just in terms of straight up numbers, means that we are often in that exact same place, right? We're like, I know somebody who's awesome. I want to put them in this place because I think they'll do good work. Is that authentic relationship, or is that the old boys network, right? And so we've gone, in some ways, the way that you can address that question is by becoming hyper legalistic about things, right? You're like, we have to have a process where we vet things and blah, 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 right? And it's like, it's 100% procedural, Mike, all the time. Or we have sort of a system that operates in the opposite way, where it's like all back end shadow, and then things just happen. And if you have good people, when things are just happening, you have good results, but things can fall apart so easily. And so one of the things that I think about as a leader, as one of the things that I think about as we as a denomination are talking about what accountability really means for us as a denomination, is what is the intersection between accountability and relationship and formal structure, right? It's very easy to talk about accountability and relationship in the interpersonal space. And it's very easy in some ways to talk about accountability and relationship in a formal structured space. But the places where those two things intersect, we have a lot of gray area that we don't talk about a lot. And one of the things that I have super appreciated in the past year that I have been shadowing Aisha, as I have been the president-elect of Laredo, and Aisha has been completing her term of service, is really Aisha's example has allowed me to let go of a lot of the fear about talking about the things that institutionality says that we shouldn't talk about. And I think that I think that we as religious professionals actually have the training, the theology, and the maturity to have those conversations well, to understand the difference between privacy, between confidentiality, and between making things happen in the shadows. And we have the clarity about those things, And specifically as Unitarian Universalists, where our allegiance is to truth and to relationship, as opposed to dogma, we have the opportunity to do this in a really faithful way. I had some other things about adult religious education, but I'm going to stop there.
Yes, I think, thank you, Catherine, for that. And again, it's been a glorious, really tenure, and especially this year, knowing you will be taking over, which I'm very excited about. One of the things that came up for me, I think, I want to take to the point which Kiana Dene, I want to give you credit for putting in the chat, to talk about why faith formation across the lifespan is so important. And I'm going to connect it to actually what Catherine said about conversations and what we talk about as the board, but also as a faith. So I was just at a higher ed conference last week, and Michelle Alexander, who is UUH Jason, who wrote The New Jim Crow, one of the things she said, she was one of the keynotes, and it was so poignant. She talked about, she's a civil rights lawyer, and she said, when the rhetoric that led to mass incarceration by a Democratic president, by the way, she said, I went into the rhetoric too. And she said, one of my learnings is we have to be able to talk to our friends and challenge them. And so she used even a little bit stronger language, but I think one of the our blessings is also our challenge in Unitarian Universalism. We are so relational, and we find out quickly how small we are, but it also sometimes makes it more challenging to say to those we love and who are our friends, here's something that is a challenge and hard, and we need to be able to do better. And I want people to do that for me. That's one of the gifts that I have at this stage in my life. And I'd like to think for most of my life that people tell me the truth, because there's oftentimes I don't want to hear that truth, but I have to hear it. And so lifespan faith formation, we tell truth to little kids, in our RE programs. We have them start to do a covenant in preschool, like don't hit, don't bite, but we start the conversation of what that looks like. And then I think we lose it in adulthood. I think we have a harder time. We don't want to hurt our friends. We don't want to, there's all kinds of narratives, but I want to throw it to other people. And one more thing before we throw it to other people, throw it gently past. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, I'm going to choose to use that word, about religious educators who don't go to seminary, that somehow we haven't gone through our own spiritual transformation, and we sure as shit have. We may not have gotten into debt for it, or read or pretended to read 400 books about it, but we have, there I said it, we have absolutely and do go through our own transformation spiritually and collectively in community. So I just want to kind of dispel that, because I've heard that kind of in some versions or another, that, well, I went through seminary and therefore and yeah, you definitely have a different kind of learning path, and you come out knowing different things than I do. But I sure as shit as a faith leader have gone and I'm still going through a spiritual transformation. So I will leave it there.
Yeah, thanks, Aisha. I really appreciate you naming that. I think one of the things we talked about bringing up in this conversation and the Fahs panel, and recognize the sort of particularity of this topic, because it's big. But one of the realities of this late stage COVID, whatever you refer to this sort of time after the impact of the past few years, is that what had already been kind of a crisis in the field of religious education, in that profession of a lack of job security, and being really closely impacted by budgetary swings, and is religious educators have really, those challenges have gotten far worse in the wake of COVID. And at the same time, there is a crisis in ministry. I know there are all kinds of concerns that ministers are facing. There is challenges with the UUA. There is certainly congregational challenges for our lay leaders, right? So each of these communities within our community, each of these professional networks and non-professional networks of people are struggling. And there is this real competitive sort of confrontational tension between these different groups and feeling of being disregarded, being let down, all in the lens of we one of the things we don't do a good job of talking openly about is the power analysis of what these different roles hold and what it means. And so, yes, ministers are struggling right now, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it has a big impact on our faith. It certainly has a big impact on any of the ministers who are having crisis of faith, or the shortage of ministers that we're facing right now, the shortage of interims, the shortage of, right, there's all these challenges in that area. And that area comparatively has more job security, has more protections, is elevated in a different way, holds a different amount of power than all of those things which are also playing out for religious educators. But a religious educator can lose their job and literally be out the door the next day with no severance package, no support, nothing. So like, how do we have those dialogues too, in ways that recognize that we are all supposedly working and practicing this same faith, and what does that look like? And so again, I think those are conversations we have the capacity to have as religious professionals. Particularly, we have to have those conversations as religious professionals in order to be able to have those with lay leaders in our congregations, and we need to have those conversations with lay leaders in our congregations. So how do we build the trust? And that's really just sort of repeating myself, but a piece of that is coming back to, where do we build that relationship and that trust so that we can have these hard conversations that are both and conversations, not either or conversations.
Well, for those of us who are given power by the system, how do we make ourselves trustworthy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and acknowledge the power that can be along with other things, right? It doesn't have to mean that it's not hard, but right, yeah, it would go a long way.
Kiana,
like-
today you're muted.
I'm working on that. It's year 3. I'm going to get good at it one day. I think the reason I asked this question is because I want to tease and make sure folks show up for us at GA. But why this conversation is so important is because as we come out of the heavier layers of COVID, not that it's gone, just a heavier blanket of it, I think we have an opportunity to examine who we are in this moment, right now, live and in action. We have an opportunity to look internally, to look at our house, and to address some of the things, so that in the next layer of who we are, when we open those doors, the folks who are standing behind us feel excited, and the folks who are walking in the door feel welcome. And if we don't pause and have a conversation about faith formation and how folks are embracing our faith, whether they are 0 or whether they are 99, we're not going to be a faith that can thrive if we're not clear about who we are, who we've been, and who we are going to be. So if we want to have a conversation about the continuum of our faith, it has to include faith education. And we have, like I said, we have a moment to be present, to answer some hard questions, deal with our own shit in the back of the house, so that we can be better in the front of the house. And it will require relationship, and it will require some really hard honesty. I call us back. I'm going to do this really quickly to Article 2, and I can hear Elandria's voice when they issue the charge, and say we have to be honest about our history. We have to be honest about who we've been and how we've moved. And for me, those words have been a lightning rod and a grounding tool. And I call us to be honest about who we are and be honest about who we want to be, and use that as a guide as we move forward, to be the best denomination possible. So
before we wrap up, and we will wrap up with a moment of remembrance for 3 giants in our faith who joined the ancestors this week. I want to give our guests a final chance to say something that you haven't said that's on your mind, Kirsten or Catherine.
Okay, I'll go first this time. I will just say fractals, that from the smallest to the biggest, there's so much repetition. Adrienne Marie Brown's work, and and Community of Communities, Paula Cole-Jones, Dr. Paula Cole-Jones. The idea that that we can do this work on a small scale applies in large ways too, and there's continuity to that, and I find that to be hopeful.
So here's the come to the Fahs Lecture teaser. We say it often, I'll say it again, kids don't drive themselves to church. So come find out what we mean by that. Friday, June 23rd, 12:30 Eastern, live in Pittsburgh and online.
Thank you so much. And as we wrap up VU number 399, just a moment to honor three great losses in our faith that we know of. But Yobanzi Charles Johnson and Jose Ballester were both long-time elder ministers of color in our movement, and Sally Lieberman, a long-time and expert religious educator, and all three of them joined the ancestors this week. I know, Aisha, is there anything you want to say specifically about Yobanzi, someone who worked closely with him?
Oh, Yobanzi was the second minister I worked with. And he, thank Black Jesus that I had the experience I did with Yobanzi. He never treated me as other than a colleague, and with deep respect. And he lived faith formation. He was also a professor at some point in his career at Starr King. And so he lived being a religious educator as an ordained minister. I first heard about that he passed away last week. I was in New Orleans and I hadn't seen a second line yet. And within the hour, I saw a second line. And that's when I started crying, because it didn't hit me right when I got the call. And so thank you for that. It's hard to believe I won't get to see him again.
And so if you would, just a moment of silence for these three wonderful people. Amen. Ashe. Next week is VU number 400, friends. 400, and the Reverends Meg Riley and Joanna Fontaine Crawford, who founded this mess 400 episodes ago, are going to be coming back to join us to talk about Unitarian Universalism, social media, online presence, and why we're all sitting here and have been every Thursday for 9 years. And we're really looking forward to that. So, get your festive clothes on, Kiana Dene. For episode 300, we all wore Meg Riley hats. So I don't know what we're going to do for 400. But looking forward to surprising you with some fun.
Our friend Joanna makes an amazing drink selection, and I wonder if we should all make drinks and drink her drink selection during the noon show. That might be a good 9
a.m. to do a mocktail.
I think
what could possibly go wrong?
But Kiana, today you feel free to represent the cocktail drinkers among us, if you want. And thank you so much, Catherine and Kirsten. Thank you so much for being here. I am looking forward to the Fahs. Not so much a lecture; it's the Fahs panel conversation, the Fahs collaboration. So looking forward to it, to learning all I can from it, and to having it transform my ministry. Thank you, viewers, for being with us.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry. It is because of you that this ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit clfuu.org/give for more information. We hope you will join us next week for another episode of The View.